This week on the agenda, the return of Donald Trump ahead of his second inauguration. Just how will the new US president affect the rest of the world? On Monday, the 20th of January, Donald Trump will be sworn in for a second time as US president. In the run-up to his inauguration, he's talked tough on tariffs and suggested the US might be looking to take control of Greenland and the Panama Canal. But is all that just talk? Or is it what we can really expect from his second term in office? Joining me now are Daniel Mulhall, former Irish ambassador to the United States, who served during Trump's first term. Stuart Eizenstat, former ambassador of the United States to the European Union. Tim Bale, Professor of Politics at Queen Mary University of London, and Wang Huiyao, former councillor at the China State Council. Thank you for coming on the agenda, gentlemen. Daniel, let me start with you, because Trump has a record of unpredictability, something that you will have seen firsthand during his first term when you were Irish ambassador in Washington. But I'm going to ask you anyway, what can we expect from Trump 2.0?
I think unpredictable is the correct word to use. Look, the first Trump presidency was very challenging for everyone involved, for the European Union, for all the countries that I dealt with when I was in the United States. We all had some difficulties with the Trump administration. I think this one will be different. It'll be different because I think it'll be a more radical presidency, potentially, and because Donald Trump is now in total control of the Republican Party, which wasn't the case during the first Trump term. And secondly, he's got people around him now who are more ideologically committed to his agenda and likely to be more supportive of him, total loyalists to the Trump cause, which wasn't the case last time around. So I think we're in for a rough ride. I keep referring to it as a roller coaster ride, and we don't know what the exact direction of travel will be, but I think we can expect some surprises. However, I would also say that every government that comes into power has an ambitious agenda of things it wants to do, and no government ever manages to do all of those things. So the same will be true of the Trump to presidency. You can't make America great again with the stroke of a pen, and governing America in the current climate is likely to be more difficult than some of his circle believe to be the case. And remember, while he won a decisive victory in the Electoral College, nearly 50% of Americans didn't vote for him. So there are going to be people who are going to be unhappy, and there will be resistance if he tries to go too far with some of his policy instincts.
Stuart, from a US perspective, would you agree with that being what we can expect from Trump's second term?
He sees unpredictability as an actual asset. He wants to seem unpredictable because he wants to sort of throw the dice and see how they land. He's very transactional. So all the things you mentioned, Greenland, Canada, Mexico, China for that matter, Panama Canal, which I was very much involved with in the Carter administration, and which I mentioned in my eulogy to President Carter, looking directly at Mr. Trump. These are all designed to try to give him leverage. So, for example, with the tariffs for Canada and Mexico, what he wants is stronger border protection and stronger protections against the import of fentanyl. That's something that's achievable. He's not asking for a reduction in the trade deficit. Likewise for Greenland, what he really wants is cheaper shipping costs for American ships going through, and similarly for the Panama Canal. So it's not that we should take this lightly, but rather this should be viewed as a negotiating leverage, as a way of trying to add an unpredictability so that his negotiating partner is put at a disadvantage. This is typical of someone who wrote a book called Art of the Deal.
Tim, what do you think Trump will change about how America does business abroad? We're talking here about America first. I mean, what's that really going to mean for global supply chains and for international trade relationships?
Well, for trade relationships, I think, as we've already heard, it is very much America first. It's very much doing deals which favour American companies, particularly perhaps because we've heard so much about it in the news recently, social media companies. I think there is going to be an attempt on the part of the US government, much to the pleasure, I think, of Mark Zuckerberg at Meta and Elon Musk at X, to force the European Union and indeed the UK off further regulating social media by, to some extent, throwing the power of the US government behind those platforms. I think also, clearly, there's going to be a relationship forged between, on the one hand, America's trade policy and on the other, its defense policy. And threats made about the withdrawal of support, not just to Ukraine, but to NATO more generally, unless NATO, of course, gets its act together, will be used in order, perhaps, for those countries involved to give America more of what it wants on the trading front. So, I mean, I would echo what has been said so far. Expect the unexpected. Yeah. There is an extent, as we've already heard, that Donald Trump plays this kind of madman theory of foreign relations and defense relations. It's all about, as we've already heard, the unpredictability. Yeah. And he is, as we've already heard, a very transactional politician. It will be interesting for me, anyway, to see whether there is any mismatch between, on the one hand, the ideology of some of those around him, and on the other hand, his very transactional style. Yeah. The two things don't always go together.
I do want to stick with trade for now, Huiyao, because since he won November's election, Trump has persistently threatened these huge tariffs, like we've been hearing, against US trading partners who are quite key: China, Canada, Mexico. But disrupting those global supply chains is going to affect US exports as well, isn't it?
Yes, absolutely. And well, what I think that, as everybody had just said, he's a businessman. He has a transactional in nature. And of course, we remember in the first term, he started the trade war with China. That how actually shaped the narratives of U.S. on China, bipartisan consensus. And for the last 8 years, he has, you know, that has been already a Trump legacy now already. But this term, he's using trade to achieve a bigger objective now, use tariff. As you said, you know, he's aiming not only China now, he's aiming Canada, Mexico, Greenland, Panama, you know, EU, everybody. And I think he wants to reshape the U.S. as probably as a top dog of the world, but also he has much more ambition now. I mean, more than ambition in containing China. He probably wants to expand U.S. into merge with Canada and get a Greenland and change the Mexico Gulf into American Gulf. You know, I mean, there's many things. So he's you know, proposing a bigger, much larger picture now for his second term. Of course, there may be some buffering, there may be some high talking, but I think that represents his transaction in nature. So this term, he's going to transact. He's going to make a big deal, not just focusing on China. He has a picture of, you know, Soviet, Russia and Middle East and Europe, and so he's less binded by the technology, by the ideology. He's more driven by the you know, by the deals, by how much U.S. is going to gain from all those things. Yeah. So wait and see. You know, his first term started with China, that shaped the narrative until today. Now the second term, he's going to have a new narrative, a new ambition, and a new path for the world of America, not just on China now. So I think he's gone beyond that already.
So let's talk a little bit more about some of those sweeping tariffs on Europe. I mean, in Daniel, they're going to hit the EU's largest economies hard, aren't they?
Yes, I mean, he has this extraordinary affection for tariffs. He said that the word tariff is the most beautiful word in the English language. Now, I think most economists will tell you that tariffs have a limited value and that ultimately tariffs are paid for by the consumer in America rather than by the countries that are exporting goods to the United States. So I think that his passion for tariffs may run up against the realities of life. And if you start to see inflation kicking up, if you start to see disruption, if you start to see the stock markets reacting negatively, if you start to see bond yields, go up, all of those things, he can't ignore. So my point is that there's a real world out there, as well as the world of ideology and, Donald Trump's wishes to do X, Y, and Z. So I do think that the realities of the world will come into conflict with the ideological urgings that are driving him forward. Now, I expect the European Union is good at one thing. The Commission is one of the most experienced trade negotiators on the planet, because it's constantly negotiating with all sorts of groups and countries around the world. And I'm sure that the European Commission has a package of proposals to make to the new Trump administration to try to avoid an escalation of tit-for-tat imposition of tariffs, which would be damaging for both economies. My hope is that over the next few months, those proposals will result in a serious discussion between the two sides and the avoidance of the worst kind of trade war, which would be damaging to the European Union and to the United States.
Tim, Donald Trump says he sympathises with Russia's position that Ukraine should not be part of NATO. He's been critical of NATO and raised questions about US support for European security. So what are the implications of potential holes in EU defence and security?
Well, of course, the EU has a very limited defence and security capability in and of itself. It relies, as far as most countries are concerned anyway, on NATO. The relationship between the EU and NATO is complex, but generally speaking, it is NATO, obviously, that does the defending. Donald Trump, in his first term, made the point that there is an extent to which European countries have been free-riding on the United States for their defence for some time, and that is, to be honest, a reasonable position. It is clear that for a number of years, Europe hasn't really spent enough on its own defence. The question is whether his talk on this is a way of getting Europe to actually pay its bills, or whether actually what he wants is Europe to fail to do that and therefore to pull apart NATO as a result. I think certainly in Eastern Europe and those countries which abut Russia, former Soviet Union countries, for example, in the Baltics and of course Poland, are very concerned that the United States won't necessarily, as part of its NATO commitments, come to their defence should they be attacked by Russia. Hopefully that won't happen, and hopefully the kind of madman theory of international relations that I was talking about earlier will actually prevent Vladimir Putin from chancing his arm on that. But certainly there is an awful lot of concern among NATO members that the organisation may not have a future, or at least not the kind of a future that it had under democratic presidents. But we shall see. It is true that the new head of NATO is someone who previously, this is Mark Rutte, has been able to get on with Donald Trump. And obviously that personal chemistry can sometimes make a big difference with this particular president.
We'll pause there for a moment, but do stay with us, as still to come here on the agenda, a question of Musk. Just what role will tech billionaire Elon really play in the Trump administration?
We are all connected. Across borders, across continents, connected by ideas, a shared humanity. Stay connected.
Welcome back to the agenda. And let's return now to our discussion of Trump 2.0 and what we can really expect after next week's inauguration. Still with me are Daniel Mulhall, former Irish ambassador to the United States, who served during Trump's first term, Stuart Eizenstat, former ambassador of the United States to the European Union. Tim Bale, Professor of Politics at Queen Mary University of London, and Wang Huiyao, former councillor at the China State Council. We've talked a little bit about Russia. I want to talk now more about China, Huiyao, because in his New Year's address, China's President Xi said the economy was on an upward trajectory, but acknowledged the challenges and uncertainties in the external environment. Now, of course, trade tensions between the US and China have grown under Biden. But how do you see the relationship between China and the US changing with Trump back in the White House?
Well, I'm actually cautiously optimistic. I think he's a businessman and he wants to make a deal. I mean, from what this term he appointed Elon Musk as his cabinet members, but also he has a very good relation with Tim Cook, with Apple, which both Tesla and Apple has done huge business on China. And also he has a good relation with Steve Schwarzman, who founded the Tsinghua Schwarzman College, who served as his first advisory board chair during his first term. So you have so many savvy and smart businessmen around him. I mean, they know they can work together and make deals. Of course, he has hawkish team, all those, like Secretary of State and all the others. But they are very loyal to Trump. They're going to follow the top leaders' advice as well. So I'm actually seeing this term, given that. That China and U.S. both largest economy in the world. I mean, who else can be a best deal maker other than China with U.S.? So let's wait. Trump did phase one. I mean, he had a big celebration at the White House. If not for the COVID, I mean, we could probably already finish that deal. But let's continue phase two, phase three. And so I think he probably going to have all those concrete matters to be deal with, like IPI issues, trade tariff deficits, and agricultural product, and also overcapacity, whatever. So let's focus on all those concrete issues, including fentanyl, rather than autocracy versus democracy and ideological driven, and also rivalry, high fence, and small yard, and all those sanctions of every company's that semiconductor, forbidden to sell, which has hurt U.S. economy enormously, and semiconductor company lose 30, 40, 50% of business. So I think he's a businessman, and he even also proposed not to postpone the banning of the TikTok. So you can see he's already making some wise decision already, a proposal. And he said that very correctly. If China and U.S. works together, there's no world issue that cannot be solved with these two countries work together. That's absolutely correct. So I think this second term, after he started the first term, that built up the consensus, built up the narrative on China. This term, he's going to find some new narrative, a new consensus, and then he's probably have a big ambition to tackle the world. I mean, to some extent. So I think we probably have the romance of three kingdoms: China, EU, US, and of course global South, BRICS countries. And on top of that, the war in Russia and the Middle East. He wants to be a peace president, and China can help him on that, and China can support him and can help him to be the peace president, or even get Nobel Peace Prize. So I think China and the U.S. has much to work for the sake of mankind and for the global prosperity and stability.
You mentioned Russia there, China, the global South, emerging economies, but how about Europe, Stuart? Where do you see things going when it comes to negotiations over things like electric vehicles, solar panels? This is going to be pretty tricky diplomatically, isn't it?
I want to make it clear. What he means by America first is not that America is totally isolationist, although there is a strong isolationist tendency in the right wing of the Republican Party. Rather, it is unilateralism. He does not put any confidence in alliances, whether it's the EU, whether it's NATO, whether it's the South Korea-Japan U.S. relationship that President Biden did, whether it's the Quad in Asia. He puts very little stake in that. He believes the U.S. somehow comes out the loser, that it's the sucker that ends up paying a disproportionate amount. And his whole notion in foreign policy is unilateralism to achieve transactional results that he doesn't think he can get from the alliances themselves. So my belief is, with respect to Europe, it's very important for the European Commission, which they're already doing, to begin to prepare countermeasures to deal with this, so that they're fighting on at least somewhat of an equal ground. And we are huge trading partners of the EU and vice versa. And the EU therefore has leverage as well. Yeah. Now, the other thing is, this can be a positive, and that is if the European Union takes seriously the very critical report of their own former head of the European Central Bank, then that is to deregulate, to reduce regulation. Europe is in a very, very bad economic situation. Its per capita GDP has fallen compared to the U.S. dramatically over the last 20 years. Its growth is pathetic. We have very robust growth. We have unemployment at around 4%. Europe is in a very stagnant position. Yeah. And if they can use the Trump threat as a way of enforcing and beginning to implement some of the things that were in that report, and deregulate and streamline and become more innovative, that will be a potential benefit from all of this strum and drum policy that we're getting. Yes. So I think the way in which Europe reacts will be important. And one of the problems is that Europe is not in a strong position. We've got a French president who has suffered defeats. We have a German chancellor who has had a vote of no confidence and is likely almost certainly to lose his position. France and Germany have always been the drivers of the EU. And so this is a serious problem. There's no leadership in Europe to rally the European Union countries of 27 and put them in a position to begin to compete and to stand up and stand on their own.
The report you're talking about there, of course, is Mario Draghi's report on Europe and what they need to do. And it's interesting that you talk about it being a little bit of a wake-up call, because the former president of the European Commission, Jose Manuel Barroso, described Trump's return to power as shock therapy for the EU, for a continent grappling with war, rising nationalism and economic stagnation. Daniel, what's your take?
Well, when I was in Washington, one of my European Union colleagues referred at one stage to our monthly coordination meetings among the European Union ambassadors as collective psychotherapy, because we were constantly looking at problems and challenges and difficulties, and the relationship appeared to be headed down a very slippery slope. Now, in fairness, that never happened. The relationship, okay, we had two exchanges of tariffs. You had the U.S. imposed tariffs on the steel and aluminum imports from the European Union, and then they imposed tariffs in retaliation for European subsidies for Airbus. Both of those things were removed, or at least pushed aside by the Biden administration, and there's been a pretty good relationship. Although I have to say, there's been no progress in any kind of trade deal during the 4 years of the Biden administration. So I think what Stuart has said there about the lack of leadership in Europe is really very important, because normally France and Germany drives things in Europe, and probably the strongest European leader now among the big countries is Prime Minister Meloni of Italy, who's not representative, if you like, of the broad sweep of European opinion. So, look, I'm not despairing about this. I think the relationship turned out to be manageable last time round, just about manageable. And I think with a bit of effort and the experience we've had over the last 8 years with Trump, I think we can hopefully find a sweet spot for the relationship between the European Union and the United States. But it's going to be a very rocky ride, and I won't be surprised if things go awry, at least in the initial period when Trump is shooting from the hip and perhaps saying all kinds of things that will cause serious issues for European Union countries.
Something that all of you have talked about is the inner circle, the group of people that Trump builds around him to get his policies streamlined and over the line. And so, Tim, I want to pick up on something that you brought in earlier, which is Trump's closeness to Elon Musk. I mean, he bankrolled a substantial part of his presidential campaign and seems to be wading into European discourse. Is Musk Trump's wingman, and what do we make of that?
I mean, I think there is a degree to which, because Trump is such a transactional politician, he has made use of Elon Musk, and Elon Musk, being a fairly transactional businessman, has made use of Donald Trump. I think the question is whether that sort of mutually beneficial relationship can last the distance. They are two famously fairly egotistical men, and it is not necessarily the case that the interests of X are the interests of the US government or indeed Donald Trump's version of the US government. I think there is a hope in Europe anyway that eventually the relationship will sour, and therefore that they aren't facing so much difficulty when it comes to criticism of them, both from Trump and from Elon Musk. Whether that will be the case or whether that's just a hope remains to be seen. I mean, I think it may depend on the extent to which Musk is able, and obviously this is his role in the Trump administration, to save millions, billions of dollars from the government. If he manages to do that, then he may well maintain his relationship with Donald Trump. And of course, it may well give people on the right of politics in Europe some inspiration. They want to see massive savings made in their own budgets. And if Elon Musk can pull that off for Donald Trump, that's going to be a good thing for them.
So what do you think, Stuart? How much of an influence is Elon Musk really?
So you could write a Shakespearean play about the relationship between these two over the next 4 years in the following way. He helped bankroll the Trump presidential campaign. He provided, through his Twitter platform, enormous opportunities to reach tens of millions of people on Trump's behalf. He's been asked to head this non-governmental commission to find how to cut programs. And so he has an inside track, and I would not be surprised if he is the one that purchases TikTok with Trump's blessing. But on the other hand, his ego will get into his way, and already we see a conflict between Steve Bannon, who is another one of long-term advisors on the right to Trump, and Elon Musk on the question of more visas for highly qualified workers. Bannon is against it, Trump is for it. In addition, when this report of the so-called DOGE, D-O-G-E commission comes out, trying to cut $2 trillion from a budget, 70% of which is locked into entitlements, defense, and paying the debt, it is going to touch a lot of very sensitive nerves, even in the Republican Party and even in the Trump White House. And that could cause a real explosion. So I think that this is going to be a very tempestuous relationship. It's one that Trump won't want to totally disown because he owes too much to Musk, and particularly if he buys TikTok, he gives him another platform. But at the same time, he does not like to share the spotlight with anybody else, and neither does Musk. So that's why I say, where's Shakespeare when we really need him?
Thank you, Stuart Eizenstat, Daniel Mulhall, Wang, Huiyao, and Tim Bale. You can watch every episode of The Agenda in full on CGTN Europe's YouTube channel. And for exclusive extra content from me, my guests, and the rest of the team, don't forget to check out The Agenda Show on TikTok. Coming up on a future agenda, will be in Davos as more than 60 world leaders and 900 CEOs gather for the World Economic Forum's annual meeting. But for now, from me, Juliet, Mann, and from all the Agenda team here in London, goodbye.